Hello and welcome to this episode of Congressional Conversations, where we discuss the priorities of New York's Jewish community with members of the New York Congressional Delegation. I'm your host, Michael Miller, the Executive Vice President and CEO of the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York, JCRC-NY. And today, hailing from New York's 9th Congressional District, in the hood, in the heart of Brooklyn, where she is today, we welcome Representative Yvette Clarke. Representative Clarke is the Vice Chair of the Energy and Commerce Committee, member of the Committee on Homeland Security, on the Subcommittee of Homeland Security regarding border security, facilitation, and operations, as well as emergency preparedness, response and recovery, and a multitude of caucuses. And there's so many caucuses on Capitol Hill, including a Congressional Progressive Caucus, of course, the Congressional Black Caucus. And we are thrilled to welcome a longstanding friend of mine, 2 generations. I've known her mom even longer than I've known her, Congresswoman Yvette Clarke. Hello, welcome.
Well, thank you for having me, Michael Miller. Shalom. It's wonderful to be with you. I know we normally come together physically, but it's great to be with you, albeit virtually. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. I owe you a bagel.
With lox.
With lox. Yeah, if we're lucky. Okay, so I mentioned your mom. Can you tell us a little bit about your background? I always like to start our shows with our viewers getting to know the members of Congress more intimately, more personally, and what inspired you along the line to end up in congressional work to run for public office?
Well, first of all, my parents were immigrants to the United States. They came from the beautiful island nation of Jamaica, yes. And they came to the United States in the 1950s. They moved to Brooklyn, where, many of their relatives, extended family, colleagues and classmates were immigrating at the time. And I was born here in Brooklyn. One of the ways that I think, made my parents sort of pursue their American dream was being of service to others and building community, essentially, in a way to navigate my brother and I, because they were navigating the nation. And so I think that the service that I grew up in as a result of my parents, just again, pursuing their American dream and navigating all of the systems that would educate us, make sure we were healthy, all of those things led to a lifetime of activism, quite frankly. Because, growing up in Brooklyn, there's always noise, there are always demands. And that was the energy of sort of my childhood. That service became sort of baked into our DNA. And being very close with my mom, she was really, a leader from the grassroots up, whether it was our block association, the PTA, and, my mom was a trailblazer in childcare. But she wasn't the beneficiary of childcare. So I was with her all the time. Wow. And I think that, again, I just saw such joy from seeing like ordinary citizens organize, execute, and then me be the beneficiary of it, right? Because what they were doing was really to build community, a healthy, thriving community that you could raise your children in. And I was the beneficiary of that. So having said all of that, Michael Miller, it was my household. It was my environment. It was, the people that were truly the village that raised the child that fostered in me this passion for service.
Yeah, and you ran for city council. You were a city council member, and then for Congress. What term are you in now? How long have you been in?
I've just begun my 8th term in Congress. My 8th term, absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely. And I did want to just correct something you said in my introduction, just very quickly. So I was the vice chair of the Energy and Commerce Committee in the last Congress, the 116th. I had to relinquish the seat. It was a one-term deal, but I'm still leading on so many issues within the portfolio and have been charged with our chairman, Frank Pallone, to head up a disparities working group among our colleagues to look at legislation that we could advance that will help navigate us out of this pandemic, because our portfolio covers so much of what we've used as a lifeline during the pandemic. And then I have now become chair of the subcommittee of cybersecurity in the House Homeland Security Committee. So, there's been some leadership changes, but I'm up to the task, and I really appreciate my colleagues' faith in me.
And I thank you. I appreciate your colleagues' faith in you, and I appreciate my colleagues, and I have faith in them. But for the next time we do an introduction, let's make sure that we have the most up-to-date information on the member in the 117th Congress. And you spoke about disparities, and you have really and truly been a leader in this battle against COVID-19 and for COVID relief. So what are some of the initiatives that you've engaged in, particularly with healthcare disparities? And Congresswoman, you should know that we have established in Brooklyn a healthcare disparity interfaith multi-ethnic coalition led by the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York, led by JCRC. So we recognize very well that there are disparities that distinguish between people of different backgrounds, different faiths, different complexions, et cetera, different races. What have you been able to do in Congress, particularly as a subcommittee chair, in this space?
Well, clearly COVID-19, this pandemic has truly laid bare the disparities in health, in well-being, in livelihood, the whole nine. And the Energy and Commerce Committee saw this coming very swiftly, what would be the outcome of a pandemic of this magnitude. And the first thing that we were very successful in doing was rolling out our testing regime. Unfortunately, New York was the outbreak epicenter. And so I was relaying to my colleagues in Washington what was happening in real time. And as a result of that, we were able to begin standing up, the rollout of the testing. We knew that was paramount. We then knew that we had to begin tracing people because the outbreak was so swift. And having been in New York City and on the West Coast, it wouldn't be long before it hit the rest of the nation. And so contact tracing was brought online. We realized that our hospital systems were being overwhelmed, and that there was potential for that going forward. There were so many materials we didn't have in terms of PPE and all of those things. So we had to quickly pass an emergency measure to fund all of that. COVID-19 was just devastating. And as I saw New York City, particularly the 9th district, get so hard hit, lose so many lives so rapidly and livelihoods just as rapidly, I knew that, my being on the ground, helping with food distribution, getting PPE to just everyday Brooklynites, what was going to be paramount in tamping down what was really a raging pandemic here in central Brooklyn. And it was difficult because we didn't have the right coordination coming from the White House. And so it's trying to make sure that we are getting scientific-based knowledge into our communities. And I think, thank God we did a good job, but at a very dear price, Yeah,
and the price is still being paid.
Yes.
I even heard that of course the vaccine supply is really at the heart of trying to defeat this this pandemic, and the vaccine supply comes and it goes. It comes and it goes. Hopefully there'll be to use a quip, I guess, that it'll be a shot in the arm, just moving forward, that we really need to replenish our supply of vaccines in order to ensure that the healthcare disparities are not as evidenced as they are today.
Well, let me say this. I'm very clear that, the most vulnerable communities are the ones that ultimately, have been sort of neglected and sort of last in terms of, making sure that their health needs are met. I think that we're 54 days into this administration, and they are doing a magnificent job. They have bought online another vaccine, which is now being mass produced. And so I think that we're going to see the ramping up. What I've been working on is a public health infrastructure, because part of the challenge is the fragmented way in which we are addressing the needs of the people in the community. You have the state on one level, you have the city on another level, the federal government is feeding into both, but the coordination from our community-based clinics to our local pharmacies, to our religious institutions, to the hospital infrastructure within our communities is very disjointed. We need to stand up a 21st century public health infrastructure that maximizes on all of the health resources we have in our community so that everyone can access the healthcare that they need. Because, this pandemic, we're moving through it, but it's got a lot of residual effects within our community. There are people who are long haulers, who will need specific types of therapies going forward just to have a semblance of a good quality of life. There's still a lot we don't know about the virus itself and its mutations. So, we're really on a new frontier. And I think, being very vigilant and visionary in this time is going to be critical for our survival. And for our getting our economy back and getting life to a new place, if you will. I never say go back to normal, because I don't think we're going back to normal as we know it. We will be creating a new normal.
Right, there'll be a new normal. But you've touched on so many things. I still want to dwell on the pandemic. Central Brooklyn that you represent is peppered with numerous small businesses who have really been impacted. B, also in Central Brooklyn and throughout New York, the issue of affordable housing is so critical. The impact on the labor force is so critical. The impact on the not-for-profit community. So let's take them one at a time. A small business. What hope do small businesses have of emerging from this devastating pandemic? So
let me say this. The 9th Congressional District is a microcosm of the world, essentially. Our small business infrastructure is the lifeblood of our commercial corridors. I've been an economic development practitioner all of my life. And we were so blessed to have Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez as the chairwoman of the Small Business Committee, because she knew from the ground up what small business is and the variety of small businesses we're facing during this crisis. So my short answer to your question is it depends on the business. And I hate to say that, but I think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of technical assistance. When we talk about equity, there was a great inequity when the program was first rolled out under the last administration. They were giving away money to the wrong businesses. Let's just put it that way. And our commercial corridors were late to the game. As a matter of fact, many didn't even receive funding in that first round because we had to go back in and really tailor it, the PPP program, to our very local communities and get alternate lenders into the space of being able to lend to people, because there was an assumption that every business out there had a bank account at, one of the major banks. That was the wrong assumption, and I think some of it was intentional, but, we're past that now. We're at a place where we think we have the infrastructure in place to encourage every business owner and entrepreneur to seek, if you seek out the programs that are available, whether it's technical assistance that's needed, whether it's a need to get your taxes together, but go ahead and let's get this done so that we can continue to see a thriving commercial corridor. I think we can come back stronger if we do the right things. Educate our entrepreneurs, undergird our existing business infrastructure, and get the public, most of all, prepared to go back into these spaces where an audience may be required. I'm thinking about our theater businesses, right? In the nonprofit, the cultures. It's going to be difficult if we don't have people fully vaccinated.
Right.
So, again, we're talking about a wide range of organizations, including our nonprofit businesses, if you will, our museums, our cultural centers that are part of the lifeblood that generate, movement and economic activity. They're stimulators in many regards. We've got to do a lot, and we're undergirding as best we can, particularly our nonprofit sector. They are eligible for the PPP program.
I know.
Yeah. So, I think we did a great job. That continues under the rescue plan. So I want to encourage everyone, get in the know, surf the net and get the information, or reach out to my office. We will guide you and give you, point you in the right direction.
That's great. And there's so much more that we could dwell on, but we have limited time. So we're going to jump to the next subject matter, and that's your service on the Homeland Security Committee and your chairmanship of subcommittees. So I'm most interested in the impact, again, on the not-for-profit community, the nonprofit security grant, and the Urban Area Security Initiative that I would love for you to explain to our viewers.
Well, I think that falls under the Judiciary Committee, but I'm very familiar with these programs. Security in our communities is so very important. And many of our private institutions, don't generate the type of funding to really do the type of surveillance and understanding of how to secure premises. And that goes for, so many of our religious institutions. Those public security grants really enable us to have that layer of hardening around, vulnerable and targeted populations in our communities. And, I'm an advocate for it. I think it's important. We can't live in a society where, unfortunately, we're seeing a rise in hate crimes and not be responsible enough to enable for our people to keep our congregations safe.
Yeah.
And one of the, we've got to do more to diffuse hate. But until we do, until we're in that space, I think, it's better to be prepared and preventing than to have to deal with an aftermath of a tragedy.
Right. I think that particularly Holocaust education, that students learning about unchecked hatred can lead to genocide, can lead to disaster. I think
we've seen it. We see it throughout history, and unfortunately, we've got to do more to educate and inform. And as a member of the Homeland Security Committee, one of the areas that I'm looking at in terms of cybersecurity is how these messages are permeating through the internet, false, fake information that are designed to format hate. And, that's an area that I don't think enough people, give credence to, because not everyone is familiar with the design of these programs that we all utilize and how it basically is meant to indoctrinate people into certain habits, depending on what your interests are. So if your interests is in hatred, in bigotry, and discrimination, you can find content that will continue to feed into that view to the world. And we're up against that to a large extent in many different communities. And I think the last administration was highly irresponsible in not addressing that issue and in some ways enabling it.
Yeah, and cybersecurity is a significant concern to us in the Jewish community and any other community of faith. There have been Zoom bombings of religious services, of Jewish programming. There have been invasions into websites such as that of the North Shore Hebrew Academy in Nassau County and Long Island. What can a congressional committee do to institute, as you were talking about before, some assurance to those of us in the not-for-profit world, in the faith world, that how we communicate, as we're doing now, is going to be protected from individuals who are not seeking to do any good?
Well, we're trying to hold the private sector accountable. You know, at the end of the day, all of the infrastructure that we're using, the platforms, they're in the private domain. And we want to establish a code of conduct, if you will, that we can, let's say, enforce, that does not run afoul of First Amendment rights, but at the same time protects us from individuals who are utilizing these platforms to harm others. And that's this is a rapidly developing dynamic. The pandemic has driven all of us who have access to the internet to more of a virtual life. We had to adopt the technology like overnight. Children are learning, their studies through these devices.
Yes.
And so, we have an obligation and a responsibility to really establish some hardened rules on the road, because the implications for our society are tremendous. And we've been having conversations about that. So you're absolutely right. I think there's a lot that we need to do in communicating with the public, the nonprofit sector, those who are being targeted. And all of us are being targeted to a certain extent by different means. But when it operationalizes and materializes and becomes violent, we have an obligation to protect everyone, protect our communities.
Right, as we saw on January 6th, we saw it operationalized. There was so much negative messaging, let alone rank anti-Semitism, racism, the T-shirt of Camp Auschwitz, and that 6 million weren't enough. I mean, there are a lot of messages out there that are coming across our computer screens that are really messing around with the minds of our young people and not so young people.
Yes, absolutely. Michael Miller, this is a 21st century issue that we can't afford to play around with. When we talk about health and well-being, that extends to mental health. And when people get to the stage where they believe falsehood as though it were truth, that's dangerous. That's very dangerous. And so I'm very focused on that, and it comes from my lived experience growing up in a multicultural, multi-religious, multi-ethnic, multiracial community. I want to protect the people I represent. And I know that they are in the bullseye of all of these things that are happening right now. That's why I call it the microcosm, whether it's how horrible our immigration laws have been up to this point, how dehumanizing they have been for so many different people from different parts of the world. You add to that the hatred, just domestically, you know, and then we have a pandemic, right?
Right.
So it's all played out from essential workers, contracting the virus as they rush to save our lives, to families in the housing space. And I know you raised that, Rabbi Mike, the unaffordability of housing in our town it's almost a human rights abuse at this stage.
Right.
I'm seeing homelessness.
Yes.
In central Brooklyn that I've never, and I just told you, I've lived here all my life.
Right.
This is unbelievable.
Yes.
I mean, people are acting as though people have an alternative. If you are poor and you can't afford your rent and you are evicted, it's not like, oh, you can get a moving van and just leave to the next town. You have nothing.
Right.
And so I'm very focused, and the American Rescue Plan has begun sort of laying out that runway for people, because to see, and it's primarily, again, those essential workers, lower wage workers, people who help build these communities and stabilize them during a time when many people were fleeing. I don't think people remember, people were fleeing Brooklyn. There were, greater pastures in Queens and on Long Island and other places. And it was the working class that stayed to build this area. And now they can't even afford to live here. The children can't afford, and then the infrastructure around where they've lived has become decrepit, so that the public school that I went to, that enabled me to get a college education and a scholarship to college, it's a remote thing, and that was common, when I was coming up. I mean, far more common than it is now. And so there's a lot of work that has to be done moving through what I call the COVID era into a post-COVID era, where we look at where we are as a civil society and construct as many ways as possible to so that people can redeem their American dream.
Right. There's so much which we could talk about, but again, with the limitations of time, one additional issue, which we're not going to have a lot of time for at the moment, maybe we'll reschedule, and is gun violence in our respective cities, particularly in New York and in central Brooklyn, and so much more needs to be done about that. But I want to jump overseas for a moment, as you well know, representing a large Jewish population within your district. Israel is so central to our Jewish community and its safety and its security. As a member of the Progressive Caucus, what's your perspective on the U.S.-Israel relationship, as well as travel to Israel? We were honored to have had you on a JCRC mission to Israel a number of years ago. Never forget that trip. And it opened up our minds to your perspectives then, but your perspectives have probably evolved over the years. What can you share with us in regard to how you see the U.S.-Israel relationship?
Yeah, I think it's in an interesting place, because we're in a change of administration, and I'd like to see, given where we stand today, in terms of the civil society, where things are, how, for me, it's always been the elusive two-state solution.
Yeah.
And I've lamented the fact that the conditions have not presented itself within the 14 years that I've been in office to earnestly pursue that two-state solution. And maybe, I'm naive, or I'm just, an eternal optimist. I still believe in it. I still believe that it's important to have a two-state solution. So I'm at a point right now where I'm waiting to see what the dynamics that a Biden-Harris administration, a Blinken State Department bring to the table. where this is concerned, because I think that there is some stagnation. I've not heard anything that speaks to the conditions being created for a two-state solution.
Well, in the meantime, Israel is going to be having elections on March 23rd. And read in the news that there is thinking now of the fifth election in 2.5 years or something. There's a lot of instability when we really need so much stability, particularly in that part of the world.
Yes.
And your perspective is so important, not only as a person identified with progressive orientation, but as a leader in the Black community, member of the Black Caucus, but as a recognized leader of the Black community in New York. So let's just dwell for a moment as we begin to wrap up this conversation on Black-Jewish relations. You represent both a very traditional Jewish population in Crown Heights and a more progressive Jewish population in other parts of the 9th District. And the Black-Jewish relationship has been on a roller coaster. It had its peak during the Civil Rights Movement, and then it has hit a valley for a long period of time. Are you, you said you're an eternal optimist. Are you optimistic about the relation between the Black and Jewish community? There's so much that we really should be working on together.
I am. I remain an eternal optimist. As I've stated, we are in a situation in this nation and in this microcosm where, we're all in this together. I lost, friends in every community due to this pandemic. Our collective humanity has been devastated by this pandemic. And then, I've seen the diversity of thought, and what I've decided to remain focused on was the collective humanity. Because, everyone has a perspective, but I have a respect for human life. I have a respect, and I think that's part of the empathy that my parents raised me with. Mm-hmm. And so when I see a Jewish family that is attacked in my district, I feel like I'm being attacked. Mm. When I see a Black child roughed up by a police officer, I feel like he's my child. When I see an Asian person sucker punch to the ground, as I've seen in the Jewish community, I'm outraged. That could be my father. Mm. So, that for me is what drives, how I represent this district, because there is diversity. I'm not taking sides. I don't care what anyone wants me to do. I'm going to do what I believe I would want done for me. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I think that's a very inspirational way to culminate this conversation. The great Rabbi Hillel had 3 sayings. If I'm not for myself, who am I for? If I'm only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? And I think that personifies Yvette Clarke. She's her own person, but she's there for everybody, and she's there for everybody at all times now. And I'm really privileged to have had this relationship over the years, Congresswoman, and I'm very grateful that you spend so much time with us and speaking to the issues of the day. And I look forward to another opportunity somewhere down the road where we can do this again and share it with our many, many viewers so they get a chance to meet you and to see what it is that you're working on.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Michael Miller, and to your JCRC team. Thank you for making this happen. It's great to be with you. Hopefully there'll be a time when we can be together physically once again, and that time should be coming short.
Amen to that. And thank you to our audience for watching. To learn more about some of the issues we discussed today, you can check out JCRC-NY's 2021 Focus on Communal Priorities, available.
Michael Miller, I have one more thing that I'd like to say to your listening audience.
Yeah.
wear your mask.
Uh-huh.
And when your time comes, take the vaccine.
Right. Indeed.
Thank you, everybody. Stay safe
Okay.
and stay healthy.
All right. Take care. Thank you very much. See you next time on Congressional Conversations. As a congresswoman said earlier, shalom.